Hello.
Hi. I might have just yelled a little bit at Anna. She's going to be a great student. It's going to be wonderful. How are you all doing today? I'm going to try not to look over there
I know, right?
where the visual of me moving is. It's that thing when there's like a TV on in a sports bar or anywhere. I'm just like, oh, I should be talking to people. So that's a thing that happens to me. So I'm going to try really hard to pay attention to you, but also to the camera so that my mic picks me up better. How's that popcorn? Where did this come from?
I'm not sure if the person who sent us the wonderful popcorn machine wants me to say who they were, but somebody sent us a ridiculous popcorn machine, so we're eating popcorn now.
I'm really glad you put this on the wish list for GeekSpace.
All right, me too. We could have done with just a regular little air popper, but this one's so cool.
It's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool.
Oh, you have noticed that it does produce a disappointingly small amount.
That's true. But that just means that I have to add that to the pre-stream to-do list.
Mm-hmm. But it
Yeah.
is very well popped. Like,
Mhm.
I would say the
Like,
quality.
there's nothing on this. We used a little bit of what I call not butter instead of oil, and there's nothing else on this. We didn't add butter to this, we didn't add salt, and we're still, like, mowing down on it like it's candy. Maybe not quite like it's candy, but...
The only thing that would make this better, nutritional yeast. Also known as hippie powder.
Hippie powder. All right.
No one else in my house likes it.
So, hi, Teach.
Hi. What are we doing here today?
So
Where are you? What's happening here?
Hang on. The funny thing about this show and the concept for this show is that I have literally been playing D&D longer than you've been alive.
Okay, that doesn't seem likely, but might be possible.
It is. But I haven't been GMing, and having played D&D that long, I can still safely say you are one of, if not the best GM I have ever known.
I'm just going to pretend it's because you have a very small sample size.
And I've met Matt Mercer.
Oh, what? Sorry, I was just... Apparently.
That's very exciting. It's very exciting. Hang on, I need to put this into chat.
Also, you're only like 25, right? That must mean I'm like 7.
Share.
Nice. Good
Yeah.
one. Okay. So, welcome to GeekSpaceTV. If you don't know what GeekSpaceTV is, you are here at a nonprofit streaming studio based in the Seattle area with a mission to increase and promote diversity and inclusion in gaming and geek spaces. And we're turning off the air conditioner. So thank you for joining us. Today, we are starting our first episode of Behind the Screens. I believe the idea of which came from a lot of conversations, and then you created the pun title, and then we said, well, we have to do it.
I thought you created the pun title.
No, you definitely came up with Behind the Screens.
Really?
Yeah.
I could have sworn that was you.
Because my first tip as a GM is I don't use the screen.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't use this screen either. I think that they're kind of silly at this point, but because now we have things like iPads and computers and all that fun stuff.
Behind the screens.
Yeah, now we have different screens. But I remember the days before computers.
Okay, I'm not that young. I also remember the days before computers.
Not like completely before computers, but before the personal computer was a tool that you could use.
Like,
Yeah, and
I remember getting broadband. Like,
I remember getting dial-up.
that part I also vaguely remember. I don't remember when I
Anyway,
got it.
but the point is, back then, it was easily the best way to display all of the information was a DM screen. So even if you didn't use it to block the players from your notes and what you were doing and things like that, you used it as a reference sheet. So it would be
talk
sitting
about
there
those.
next to you as a reference sheet.
I have a lot of thoughts on reference sheets.
What?
Most of them
Days
are
before
positive.
computers?
Those are the dark times.
Tell us about the days of chalk slates. I do want to say that we do definitely want to take questions from chat. I am probably going to let you talk for a couple minutes while I set up BTTV and some highlight keywords.
Sounds excellent.
Because I didn't get to do that. We are on the new Stream PC, so that's another thing. If you see any issues, like any frame rate drops, whatever, let me know. Because I need to know that, because we're testing out a new Stream PC. And please share the stream.
I do remember the days of stone tablets in which I had to carve the words in by hand.
No, we did it on wood.
Couldn't
elves
afford stone
and stuff. No, because we're
Oh.
elves. I mean, anyway.
I'm pretty sure I'm a hobbit.
Aww.
I really like food. I think I share a lot of traits with hobbits. So, behind the screens, the concept behind the show is that theoretically I know what I'm talking about. And if I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm very good at pretending like I do. So we're going to talk about my strategies of how I approach running shows, and tabletop RPGs, but not just tabletop RPGs, but also those in the context of doing them live for an audience, because I do think, having done both, there are some pretty significant differences, and also some less significant differences, but things you want to keep in mind. I did make a syllabus for this show. It's over on our Wikia. I'm going to be completely honest. I made it as a joke, so it gets significantly less serious as the syllabus goes on. But I was sitting there making it and saying to myself, how deep am I going to go on this joke? And the answer was pretty deep. So you can check out the syllabus. It's available on GeekSpaceTV.wikia.com. And that'll give you a rough overview, including our learning objectives for this unit of study. We're in TTRPG 201. So you're here. This is I'm your instructor. Random Tuesday. Our class times are Wednesdays at 2 p.m. There is a lab practicum, which will be Saturdays, currently TBD. My office hours are on Tuesdays, pretty randomly. And the course website is twitch.tv/GeekSpaceTV. Any questions before we get started?
I'm having trouble finding the extension.
Oh.
So, and I also got distracted because people are saying that the audio is a little out of sync. I don't think there's anything I can do about that, short of bringing the stream down and back up. And a lot of people are also saying, hey, it's not really that bad. Or that they're not seeing it. So, I don't know.
This is a 200 level class. You can audit this class. In fact, I consider all of chat to be auditing this class. I really only have one student. There is a grading scale. Most of your work is going to be assessed on your practicum, your class participation, and your homework. And I believe the grading scale is awesome, beautiful, cool, delightful, and fantastic.
No, it wasn't delightful. Because I was hoping for a D. It was something, I don't
Delectable,
remember.
maybe?
No. It was like something classy sounding.
Unlike delightful. Delightful's not classy.
Not as classy as whatever it was.
There are no required readings for this class, but I do recommend to participate or watch at least one live stream tabletop RPG a week. So I think Anna's going to do better on that. And there's no extra credit. I don't believe in that.
I don't actually really either, barring special circumstances, and I've never needed it. I got very upset when I got a B+ in one of my classes. Here we go. Highlight keywords. What do we want to? All right, we'll have
probably
GeekSpaceTV.
Yeah.
Let's go with question.
I'm dropping popcorn on the floor.
I know. I need to vacuum anyway.
Lauren?
Yeah, that's what I got. All right, so highlighting is GeekSpaceTV, Anna, Lauren, and Question are all going to highlight.
Yeah. Excellent. So the structure of most of these, there's going to be about 2 hours, I think was our plan, and then I'm going to chill out and help Anna for another hour with planning that you don't get to see. Is going to be some conversations between the two of us, a little bit of me just standing on a soapbox.
Got a donation.
We got a donation. Thank you.
2 donations. Oh my goodness. Evie, thank you. So how about that popcorn? the tongue out, smiley face. I love you all. Please continue creating awesome shows. Thank you. We'll do our best. Question, while you're trying out to out-old each other or something, what was it like carving out words into stone tablets? Isn't the scenery around Sinai very pretty?
No, it's hot. It's a desert.
Yeah, I don't like deserts. I prefer tropical type stuff. But anyway.
Humidity's hard for me in my hair.
Mr. Polk, you are late. No. We have a very loose tardiness policy.
Yeah, I will say my lateness policy. I gave up. It was a lot more work to get everybody to like bring slips in. It's just not worth it.
On the other hand, his rabbits ate all of his homework. It's a good thing he's doing that thing you said. Brain just died mid-sentence.
Yeah.
Auditing. Yes.
Cool. So it's going to be me talking about my thoughts because I have important opinions and you get to listen to them. And then us having conversation, that's going to be a lot of me asking Anna questions and her having to answer them or telling me that she can't answer them now and that we're going to answer them later.
Yeah.
And then kind of Q&A interaction with you guys.
So I do want to say you talked about we're going to for the first 2 hours, it's going to be that back and forth. And right now, because Failing Forward, which is still a working title, the D&D show that I'm going to GM on Saturdays hasn't started yet. We're going to have a lot of off-screen planning. I am still planning on recording that. What we're going to do with that, we're not entirely sure yet. But also that 2 hours that we're live on Twitch, we'll later on, once the show has started, we'll review a little bit of what happened in the last episode, and she'll pick apart what I did horribly, horribly wrong.
That is, I believe strongly in what is fondly referred to as the shit sandwich. Which is, you tell someone something they did well, something they could have done better, and then something else that they did well. It's more important to tell people the things that went well. It's also important to tell people things that went well and not just criticism. Shit sandwich. Give that to my... You're welcome. These are the things that teachers talk about when we're not around students.
Great. Can't wait. Oh, goodness. So, and then a lot of times when you ask questions, I'm going to, like you were just saying, I'm going to be like, I can't answer that on camera right now. Because, yeah.
When do we get a shit sandwich emote? I think there's enough shit emojis that you could just do a piece of bread.
I don't really think that we need that. Thanks. Are there going to be guest speakers in this class? Field trips? Yes to the first, probably no to the second, but you never know. Maybe we'll field trip over to the GM chair.
We could. That would be a very literal behind the screen.
It would.
A very literal one. Yes, I think one of our hope is to, because I am certainly not the be-all and end-all of RPGs and playing them, as much as I wish I was. And we live in Seattle, and there are a plethora of people who play RPGs, who write RPGs, and have different styles and different ways of going about things. So I think the goal is, especially once the show is going, and we've kind of done a lot of the, like, here's how we get the basics down.
Yeah.
We can start bringing in other people for, like, well, what if you're doing something really specific?
Sorry, I am running the show while on the show, so I will have to look at my phone occasionally.
That's fine.
Okay. Apparently the audio delay isn't too bad, and you should all suck it up. That's what I've learned.
Refresh?
Okay. Yeah, maybe it got better. I don't know. So anyway, he donates so there's more show. That would be swell.
What are ways they can support us here at the Geek Space?
Well, there's donations, which we've already read out a couple of. We don't have a donation noise, so we're just kind of being like, oh, hey, there were some donations, and then we'll read them out on this show. During our RPG shows, we read them at the break and at the end of the show. You can support us with Patreon as well if you want to set up a monthly donation. Those are really nice because they're a little bit more reliable sort of income.
Predictable.
Predictable is a bit better than reliable. Like it allows me to better plan ahead. But my favorite, as you can tell by it being the top command in Nightbot, is the share command. Share the stream. Tell people about us. That is the number one way to support. That'll help us get partnered, and once we're partnered, that'll help us get more subscribers, and then subscribers in the long term, like the super long term, that's going to be the number one way to support us. Because at a certain point, we get to renegotiate rates, and we get all sorts of support from Twitch. So, like, and this is me talking. But that will be the best way to support us once we do get partnered. But in the meantime, support by sharing, by hosting the stream, and by being here for the shows that you can make it to is the number one best, my favoritist way to support us. Did I miss that?
It also doesn't really cost any money to do that one, which is pretty great.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Doesn't really, she said, in case you couldn't hear, because she was, yeah.
That was a terrible stage whisper on my part.
Yeah.
It should have been more like this.
Sure. There's just so much. Okay, that's fine. It's fine. We need a dog.
I eat food off the floor. I have very little shame.
We need a dog. I do too off my floor. Off these floors, yeah, I'm kind of overdue for vacuuming. It's fine. We need a doggo.
Yes, that is a true statement.
Studio doggo.
God, I want a dog.
Right?
So.
Anyway.
Moving swiftly on to our topics at hand, my goal is to also kind of have a little bit of theming for each session, episode, whatever we want to call it, so it's not like a complete free-for-all.
Yeah.
And kind of try and narrow our focus. So today, it's very much the like, oh yeah, so you want to run a tabletop RPG on the internet. How do you do that? And conveniently, you have like all of the technical side down, so that part is really not a thing you have to worry about.
Dotton
donated $20. More show is good. This is also a friendly hour, so it's nice. The entire GeekSpaceTV family is great, and I don't get to tell you that enough.
Aw, thank you.
Thank you, Dotton. It's also nice being able to do shows at other times of the day.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to take a quick nap. Not really, and then I'll come back and do another show.
You're going to go and take a quick nap, a.k.a. get more coffee.
This is a nap in a bottle.
Yeah. Yeah. But for me, it's nice being able to do a show that is at least close to my usual stream time, so some of my people are getting the benefits of where I've been spending all of my time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very true. So speaking of that, some of the basic concepts when you're starting a tabletop RPG online, there are a lot of different approaches that you can take, and I have been very fortunate that I've not had to really do any of the technical stuff myself. You can do fairly minimalist approaches and all of that stuff, but so if you have technical questions, this is the streaming senpai. Talk to her. She knows what she's talking about. We're going to talk more about the...
Disturbingly true.
You know so much.
It's
like, anyone asks me a question,
which is
and I'm
terrifying to me, but not untrue. That is one thing that I have learned since coming to Seattle is I do actually know my stuff.
You really do.
It's bizarre.
I legit, if I have a technical question, I will just come to you. Like, I like, why would I even bother Googling this? It's going to be useless for me. So you're welcome.
Thanks.
But we're going to talk more about once you kind of are getting started and at the table. So there are a lot of different approaches that you can take, but you need to make some decisions before you get started with an RPG. And you made one of them, which is what system you're going to run.
Dungeons and Dragons!
5th edition.
5th edition. Yeah, no, we're not going back to when I started. Wait, what? Huh? Who? Huh? Oh, goodness. Oh, we got two. We got two more. The Great Monkey. I'll read this one, because you don't do the voice.
I don't.
And I do the voice.
I've heard it, but I can't take that from you.
Today's words of wisdom from the Great Monkey are inspired by Lauren's cooking advice. Life is like a sandwich. The more you add to it, the better it becomes. And as a true monkey, I agree that shit is definitely one of the things that needs to be added. That's disgusting.
It's so gross.
So gross.
It's definitely something
But thank you very, very much for that $32.10.
The next one is a donation from Commander Dunsell. Commander Dunsell reporting in, keep doing all of the good things.
Thank you,
Salute.
Commander
They wrote it in
Dunsale.
words, but I'm gonna do it.
Yeah, salute. Now
Hey,
we
look,
have another
I'm
one.
your remote.
That's disturbingly true. In fact, I was actually thinking about adding purple to my hair last night, and then I was like, no, I have a show with Lauren tomorrow.
I believe
Yeah.
you have this one.
Yeah. Captain Sardonic, GM tips with a great GM/player and a wonderful co-host. I have to support this. And not just by watching and tweeting this time. Thank you so much, Captain Sardonic. Do appreciate that. Okay.
So now let's look at chat again.
I am going to need to get more monitors in here for this. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Or just make like Streamlabs just really big over on one of those.
Yeah, I'll figure something out. That's
It's
behind the scenes stuff. Lighting is going to be better next week, and I'm going to try and get some Sirenscape in the background, because what would be more fitting? I really need to hit them up for a like free subscription.
I also need to message them and be like, I have a feature you need to add.
Yeah, right? Where were we?
We were talking about getting started. So you've made your decision, which is the system that you're going to play with. And that's often a place where you make the decision.
And it's often like the most difficult decision.
That's what
I think-
it's in my scarf.
Yeah.
So why did you pick Dungeons and Dragons?
Because one, 5th edition is hands down the best. Yeah, I would say that it's the best Dungeons and Dragons that I've played so far, and I've played almost all of them. And it's at first I really didn't like it, and then the more I played it, the more I was like, no, these design decisions were really good, and I really like. Yeah, no, it's a great system. It's very easy for newcomers to RPGs to just dive right into, and it's my wheelhouse. Like, it is where my many years of RPG experience has been. I have played very, very few other RPGs, which is something that I very much want to fix, but not as my first on-camera GMing experience. And that's another thing. I have played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, but I haven't GM'd in a very, very long time. And when I did, I'm just going to say it, I was terrible. And I can look back on that and be like, wow, well, I see all the things that I did wrong, but I want to make sure that I don't do those things again, and now I'm getting held accountable.
I also, like, so I made the opposite mistake, which is that the first time I GM'd anything, I
warlock! Sorry.
You're a bard.
I know. Like,
Like, why is that?
with a couple of levels of rogue.
Yeah.
that's just me. I'm a bard of puns. Like, seriously, the character that I played on Mayhem and Misfits that first season, that's basically me, only without the pirate stuff.
Disappointing. I feel like you should give all of this up and go into a life of piracy.
Well, I do want to get a boat. Anyway, sorry. Continue.
So I made the opposite mistake. My very, very first, and this was before I started streaming anything, my very first RPG that I ran was Shadowrun. And I ran it. I had never played it. My players had never played it. And it was a clusterfluff. Sorry.
Whatever, we're on GeekSpaceTV. You can swear all you want.
So it was... I'm glad you've made a decision to run a system that you're comfortable and familiar with, and also one that you like, because going into something that you're like meh about is like has its own trade-offs, as I have discovered. So sometimes you're going to find that you want to start with running an RPG because you know exactly what system you want to run, and then you'll kind of build the world and the story from there. And the other time is kind of the flip side, where you might have a story and a world, and you'll spend some time trying to find the RPG. That being said, there's also a bunch of different styles of games that you can run, which I have had a lot of information directed that kind of split it into probably 3 major categories, which are basically your kind of exploration, like sandbox style of play, a much more narrative, like you have a story, you're going to push forward with a story, or what people call gamist, which is just more about like, that's where like the min-maxing sort of fits in, of like, I'm in it for the challenge of being successful playing this game. And so my question to you would be, do you have thoughts on like what sort of style of game you want this to be?
Very, very
Yes
like
or no,
story
like either way.
heavy. I'm not interested in sticking 100% to the rules and catering to the min-max sort of style of play. I'm not. That is a valid method of playing.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
min-maxing, rules lawyering, totally a valid way of enjoying the game, in my opinion. But it isn't my style. It isn't how I want to make a show. And I don't think it'll make a great show on Twitch either. But you're welcome to prove me wrong.
So my perspective is generally, I think the game style is probably less oriented towards being an effective show, because it's part of what makes shows compelling is their story and their characters. When you think about like the sort of media that you can consume or you do consume, other than video games, most of it is narrative, books, TV shows, and so you're going to find that's going to be easier for an audience to engage with, especially an audience who is potentially unfamiliar with the rules.
Although I will say, because now whenever I'm like, I don't think that would be so great, it's like, challenge accepted. There's always this part of my brain that's like, nah, we could do that. So now my brain is thinking an RPG show that is specifically designed to teach the rules could actually work depending on the system and things like that. So it can be done, but yeah. But
I
that's
think-
just not the style we want to go for.
I think it can be done either way. Like, there's nothing, I think, inherently right or wrong about any of these particular styles. And you'll also find they're not black and white. You will have at your table players who are more interested in being effective at their class and players who are not. I mean, we had Jess in Mayhem and Misfits, who was not at all interested in being an effective barbarian. She made a pixie barbarian, which was delightful and enjoyable and ridiculous. Like, we had a paladin who wanted to be a dancer. Those are all valid choices, but that is not going to win. Versus games that I've been in where players, like, I don't think you guys understand how much of a min-maxer Dan can be sometimes. And, like, how in-depth he understood the magic rules of Shadowrun. To the point that, like, if he'd wanted to, I think he could have built a character even I wouldn't have been sure how to challenge properly. But there's...
I know this.
Yeah.
But I was behind the scenes of that. So, and have worked with Dan here as well. So,
So there are different approaches that you can take, but I think the important piece is being upfront with it with your players and to an extent the audience, because you will come across situations. I'm just gonna spit on the floor.
it's fine.
You're welcome.
They wouldn't have seen that.
Yeah, but I am honest, if not anything. So even being, to an extent, upfront with the audience, because you will come across a moment where you're like, this is what the rules say, but in this situation, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And explaining to your audience, like, this is the style of play that I'm going for. In my game, in my world, the elements of the story or doing something fun or exciting or narrative is more important than what the rules specifically lay out. Which is fine. Some people don't like that, some people do. But being upfront with the players especially gives them the knowledge to build their character with and to play their character with, because there's nothing worse than like sitting down at a table being like, I have my like crazy character concept, and they're like, we're playing by all the rules, and you're like, oh, my character's gonna die real fast.
And
or the other way around.
Not even just that, but like you want to make sure that everybody at the table is having fun, and this is just as true on Twitch as it is off camera. You want to make sure everyone is having fun, because if they're not, you can tell. They need to, at least to some degree, be having fun. And if you are a min-maxer in a party of role players, that's not gonna work. And vice versa. If you are a role player, the example that you just gave, in a party full of like people who are really into the crunchy bits of the rules, you're going to die and not have a lot of fun because you just want to role play. So it's important that you have those negotiations beforehand with all of your players, that you ideally all sit down at once and at least have some conversations about what you personally want to get out of it as a player and as a GM.
So there are a couple of tools for people who aren't really sure where to start on those conversations. One, I always recommend you have a character. I recommend two things before you start any stream show: is a character generation meeting session and a practice session. And the practice session is still something I actually think is not a bad idea to do when you have a home game, but you might want to format it a little differently, because I personally tend to allow players, like, you build your character, you do your practice session, and if you want to change your character, like, then do it. Because there's nothing worse as a player than being like, oh boy, I made some mistakes in where I assigned my skills or my dots or the things that we're doing. And so we'll talk about practice sessions a little bit later.
To tie onto that really quickly, I know that with Critical Role's recent relaunch, their new campaign, they all did an episode 0 that wasn't on camera, but they couldn't all be there at the same time. So Matt split it up, and he did it in like groups of 2 and 3, and then used that time to bring them all to the same place. They were all able, at least I'm assuming, because this is how I would do it, they were all able to change things about their characters that they didn't like, which is what you were just saying, before actually going live with the full campaign, before when they were all brought together. So I think that's a useful thing of a session 0, is getting everybody together.
So those would be the pieces of getting started, I think, is the planning, the session 0. There's been some questions about who your players are and what you know about them.
Make sure that you tag either Lauren or myself, or just say question if you have a question for us, because it'll highlight on the screen now. But Frithiel was saying who my players are going to be. We've got, and I'm nervous about this, because both we've got Drunkly Romantic, Marcus, and Arya are both on Eat, Pray, Kill Friday nights, and they're both going to be on my D&D show.
Behind the scenes scene stuff that's complicated.
Well, I just don't want to overdo it with them. I don't want them to be too emotionally drained. Like, Eat, Pray, Kill is seriously intense and takes a lot out of you emotionally, and then they're going to have to get up in the morning and come back here and play a totally different character. So I do have concerns about that, but I trust them to know themselves better than I do, because they're adults. So we've got Marcus, we've got Arya, we have a never seen before on Twitch young woman named Nancy, who we met and had coffee back at the end of February, and I really, really liked her energy, and she has, like many of us, had some difficult experiences with finding an RPG group, and so we're very happy to bring her on board. And the fourth person is going to be Calamity Jamie, which I'm super excited about as well.
I am too.
When doing a new system for your players, how much do you want them to learn about? Just throw a copy of the book at them, or only the quick start? Or, I mean, for me, it's
really varies on the system.
Yeah.
So in the case of this show with Dungeons and Dragons, is an interesting one because it is a much more ubiquitous system. You can have slightly more expectations for people you know who've played RPGs, that they've potentially had some exposure and experience to it. But I have also made the mistake of assuming that players know how to play. From my perspective, the most important thing that a player needs to know is the core mechanic, which I can talk about in a second, and where everything is on their character sheet. Like, legitimately. So when Marcus joined us, when Drunkly joined us for Leviathan, I sat down with him and I just walked through his character sheet. I said, when I ask you this, this is where you're going to look. When I ask you this, this is where you're going to look. Because I built his character for him, because I was not going to expect you to know that. But the important piece is, because that, especially in a show, is what's going to suck up the most of their time. Because if you're like, I want you to roll this and this, the more time it takes them to find it, the more dead air you have. And also just the more space and time you have to kill and the longer it takes to like keep things going and moving.
Yeah.
So with D&D, that's one of the biggest things is less knowing the ins and outs and intricacies of like falling damage and running and like what you can do, is just straight up knowing where to look for things on their character sheet. And that's why it's really nice to build characters with players and like doing it as a group, because as a teacher, when someone does something for themselves, they tend to learn more out of it. So if I build a player a character sheet and hand it to them, they're going to be less familiar with it than if I walk them through and have them write down the numbers or type in the numbers as we are building the sheet. So that is also one of the pieces that I recommend if you can do. Build collaboratively, build your characters collaboratively, and then have them go away and do the fine-tuning and the nitty-gritty, or you take it away and do that. But as much as possible, do the core components of building a character at the table together. Not possible with some systems.
Yeah.
Shadowrun. It's so much more complicated to build a character. And like you can do some of the basics, but you need a program for that one. So in terms of setting up, you kind of start, especially when you're running a show, there's a lot of pulling in your players and your characters, which you've done. You're deciding on your system. And one of my questions to you is how many conversations or what have you guys started talking about in terms of what sort of characters they're going to be playing? And let me broaden this question a little bit more. How do you want those characters to fit into the world?
So, one of the things that having produced shows out here has taught me is what you do a lot in improv is you just roll with whatever the person says. And for me, like, I want this to be in a world that is unique. I want the campaign world to be a unique thing that is not just my creation, but our creation. So I've talked with Aria and Marcus most. I've talked as far as individual characters go. I haven't really talked with Jamie and Nancy all that much, which is unfortunate, but I don't see them as often as I see Marcus and Aria. But I very much want them to tell me how they fit into the world, because then, at least to a degree, they are able to create the narrative that they're looking for, or I'm able to interpret a little more what their narrative is going to be. I have imparted thematic elements to them. I want the overall world to have a certain Rat Queens feel to it. I've been making sure that they are all reading Rat Queens. I have lent out my copy of Rat Queens, and the studio bought a copy of Rat Queens since I'm making them all read it, to loan out. So we're working on that. But that's just one strong thematic element. I also have said that I want certain elements of Fey-punk involved, which to me means elements of magical technology overlap, where there's going to be a particular city that has magic a little more pervasive in their society. They'll have magical mass transportation and magical street lamps and, I don't know, a magical sewer system maybe. Who knows? But so that's kind of the extent of the conversation that I've had with all of them. And then we've gone a little bit further with Aria and Marcus as far as the kinds of characters that they want to create.
Cool. So some of the things that I would probably assign you essentially as your homework for this piece. There's a few things. One, we'll talk more about what the world is going to look like, because that's a piece that I think is, one, actually pretty, like, I did a bunch of it with Leviathan. We talked a lot about how aliens procreate. So that was great. But having those concepts, there is a certain amount of information that you will decide how much you want to create before your players sit down at the table, and then how much you want them to be filling in about the world. Yeah. So like the example of Leviathan, Claudia and Lizzie both created their alien races. I said, there are a multitude of alien races. If you want to play an alien, tell me you want to play one. You can pick one of the ones that I've already made, or you can make your own. And then we'll talk about how those fit in. So Claudia was like, I would like to be a bat. And I said, yes. And Lizzie would I'd like to be a 7-foot-tall red lizard lady. And I said, yes. And so that is an example of there were core races that existed that I created, and probably more than I needed to, but they also contributed to the world by creating these whole other cultures that existed. So we'll decide how much you want to make up front and how much you want the players to just sort of know that the players are going to fill in.
Yeah.
So that's either for a future episode or later today, and probably give you some like homework questions for that. The other one is, so you talked about wanting to know the types of characters your players want to play. Because RPGs are inherently, typically, at least when we play them, especially on Twitch, about a group of players, a group of characters coming together and doing something together as a group. One of the things I think is particularly helpful to do is to give the players a context about why they are together as a group. So the example of Leviathan is you all are going to be on this spaceship together for a reason, and all but one of them had been on that spaceship prior to the first episode. In fact, by our official first episode, not episode 0, they were all already on that ship for some reason. And on the same mission for a reason. In D&D, why are they a group of adventurers together? So that is probably a question you can decide collaboratively, but if you have a strong narrative, that will often tie into it. So one of the things you will need to decide is why are they going to be together as a group, and then giving them that piece of information so that they can make their characters fit with that.
Yeah. I was actually thinking this morning about how I want to pull them all together and tie them all together, because I don't think that we'll all be able to meet up all at once at the same time before our first show necessarily. Which means doing, again, what Critical Role did this past time, having, because the conversation in my head was wrapped up in as well in a tweet that I saw about not starting at first level, about how first level is such a turbulent level where just getting to second level, you double your roughly double your hit points, things like that. So the difference between first level and second level is huge. And my thinking in seeing that was how you could potentially use first level as your session 0, and then just however much you get through, the session 1 is second level. They've gained that level in whatever story you use to potentially to pull them all together. So that was at least what was going on in my head this morning. Frithiel asked how familiar everybody is with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. It's varying levels, but most of them don't have a lot of exposure to 5th edition, which doesn't bother me at all. 5th edition is super accessible in that way.
5th edition is great. Roll a d20, add a number to it. And tell me what that number is. That's it. That's all my players need to know when they sit down at the table.
Yeah.
And then look in the middle box.
Where it is on their character sheet.
Where
so
are those
they know.
numbers on your character sheet? So you roll and add. And then when you attack something, roll this other die if I tell you you hit them.
Yeah.
Voila. You can play D&D.
Asks if you suggest the party already be together at the start of the session. Generally, it makes things easier. I'm answering for you.
Yeah. That is, again, going to be somewhat dependent on what type of story you want to play. I think my answer to that is less a yes or no and more the group needs to have a reason to be a group. And either you can give them that reason in the first episode, or you can they can have that reason coming to it. So like Shadowrun, when I ran Corporate Sins, was an example of the first episode, for better or for worse, was them all meeting each other. And so 2 of them kind of knew each other and 2 of them didn't. And I think that works. I could have executed that better. And made it a little bit smoother, but that's often your classic, like, we're going to start with a fight and you're suddenly all in a brawl, and suddenly you're friends. So, but the other reason like Leviathan, they all were on the ship together and they all knew that they had to be there. So it varies a little bit on what sort of story you want to tell and where you want to start. And we will be talking about like first episode stories.
The one thing that I have always wanted to avoid a while ago, this like indie movie came out called The Gamers. And the line that stands out is one of their characters died, so they rolled up a new character and they were ready to jump back in. So the surviving party members are traveling along and they come across this wizard. Oh, great, or whatever it was. Oh, great, they just lost a wizard. And basically the conversation went, "You seem trustworthy. Would you care to join us in our noble quest?" Yes. Yes, I would. And then they go off together as a party. That is the one thing that, to me, you absolutely want to avoid.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how you do it, but...
Yeah, no, and that's the thing is, like, and that's also on your players. So one of the things that I will tell to my players when we're starting is I'm like, if this is, you will all, like, Leviathan as an example, you all need to be a crew member or on this ship for some reason. It is partially on you to help me come up with what that reason is. And Dan was like, well, I want to be this military officer. I want to be part of ICA. And I was like, okay, cool. Do you think you could be, like, your character could be someone in the military who would be hired to escort some people? Or, like, who would be assigned to do that? And he's like, yes. And I was like, great. Now we have a reason for you to be on the ship.
Yeah.
And a very different dynamic. And so, like, and then that's where we came up with all of, like, how did Thea and Kika end up being this, like, dynamic duo of trouble. And so putting some of that in your players' hands of getting them to come up with why they are part of each other when you give them the context of what they need to figure out.
And I feel like that also drives home a specific point a little bit, which is reminding everyone that it is a collaborative experience. And it's okay if you don't want that collaborative experience, but I don't particularly want you at my table if you don't.
Yes.
And at least for, generally speaking, for shows, it works a lot better if it is a collaborative, like it needs to be a collaborative experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be in character a collaborative experience as long as the players are treating it as a collaborative experience. So there's got to be back and forth, even if your characters are adversaries. Like I even on Leviathan, there have definitely been adversarial moments. As long as the players know that they're collaborating, then it still is fine.
Yeah, there was, I think, a question that I scrolled past. Oh, God, where'd it go? Oh, wait.
Hang on.
Which direction do I send it?
Here. There we go. Where?
I think it just was highlighted in
Was
chat,
it
but maybe
highlighted?
not. Yeah. Oh, remote tech.
Oh.
That was one of the
Would that
questions.
help with episode 0? Not in this case. That's why I didn't, because the answer
okay.
is simple. Not in this case. Jamie needs to avoid screens, it seems like is a nice way of summing that up. Marcus is right around the corner, Aria is right around the corner, and Nancy doesn't have any broadcasting gear because she's never done it before. So remote tech, I'm assuming that's what you meant by remote tech, is using the internet to do
that being said, I have
0.
done that for not for session 0, but for character planning and building. We did it for OVA, for High School Royale. We all streamed in together because we couldn't all be in the same location at the same time because transit and travel make things take longer. So we did a streamed one. And so that is also something that there are tools you can use if like it is already a struggle to meet once a week or however frequently you do it. Arguing Paradox brings up like some pretty classic ways to start, like prison breaks. We're all in a fight. You all are working towards the same goal. Like there are a lot of like classic ways to bring people together if you want the first episode to be them meeting to each other. And we'll do a whole session on first episodes or
And I have things that I have planned out for the starting adventure is it's not a campaign yet. It's a starting adventure. It's designed to set the stage and to solidify everyone's connections and interactions and get comfortable with each other, and me to get comfortable with them and the campaign world. So it's a very short thing that sows seeds to tie back in with later. But what I haven't done is figured out how they're all going to get together. And so now I'm thinking, okay, I need to plan something for session 0 that gets them all to this spot that sets them up for this other stuff.
So one thing I will say about Session 0 is conceptually it does not have to be narratively connected to the story. It can be nice. If you want to use it, like in Leviathan, I used it to set up because I was like, I need them all to be together and I have this reason. But one of the things I did even before Session 0, like where we did an actual story, is I did segments. I was like, we're going to practice combat. I don't care what you guys do. You're going to end up in a fight. We're going to roll initiative and we're just going to jump straight into it. So I was like, you're in a room. These people start attacking you. Because that, like, you want to do some just like pure mechanics practice where people can practice rolling the dice, finding the number on their character sheet, using abilities that they have and things like that. So sometimes if it's a system that people are familiar with, you need to do fewer of those. But like Shadowrun, I think we did 4 mostly mechanic tests. And like Fang went from a bloodthirsty, I'm going to cut off this person's arm and use their disembodied arm to open this biometric scanner, to Claudia as a character arc in 4 practice sessions. So I would also say, like, it's great if you can tie Session 0 in if you want to, but it's also not a necessity. So if you just think, like, here is something that I want us to practice, then you don't necessarily need to make it connected.
If Frithiel asks a good question, are regular out-of-game meetups going to be necessary for Anna off-camera too, or will it be enough to meet up for the show? This is something that I feel strongly about, that we've struggled with on a lot of our shows, particularly with Leviathan, talking about the session after the session. And the reason it's tricky for Leviathan is because we tend to go a little bit late, it's Wednesday night. Friday, it's a little bit less of an issue because it's Friday night. People generally don't have to work the next day. Saturday afternoon, we should be able to find the time to talk about the session after the session is over. And that is really, really important for unpacking any of the feels. When Strix was here for Eat, Pray, Kill, we made sure to do that. She made sure to do that, which was great. But that does after show segments. I thought after show because I saw Margaret in chat. Hi. Thinking like that is a really great thing because it helps you unpack the emotions and not suffer as much bleed between players and things like that. So that to me will be the extent of off-camera time meeting up, I hope, fingers crossed. RPGs need aftercare too, basically.
I think that's one of the things we'll talk about later on is what are some of the ways to take care of yourself both before, during, and after shows. Because one of the important things to remember is they are shows. When we're doing them on Twitch, it's not just a home game. When you're doing a home game, you can tune out a lot more easily. I mean, a lot of people are still very focused, but like you can like stretch and get up and go get a drink from the fridge and then like come back and during a scene, but and be like, oh, what did I miss? And talk to some people. But you can't really do that in a live show. And so it's part of why we take breaks. But it's also, you are just so much more focused. Like, especially as the GM, this is probably my warning to you is like, you are on the whole time because you're just listening to everybody. Because at least for me, I get this horrible fear that like a player is going to say something, even if it's an inane out of character comment that could be this perfect gem for something that I could use to like bring back later on. And so every conversation is one that I need to listen to, and that gets tiring. And you're just like, yes, you are still talking. So, some people are asking about things to do when like parties split. We can talk about that later on. There are a lot of different approaches. Excuse me.
Yeah, that is definitely something that at some point I'd like to talk about on the show because the common
don't split the party is
like
bullshit.
Rule, don't split the party. Lauren vehemently disagrees with that, and so I think that'll be a really interesting thing to unpack at some point.
Splitting the party is a bad idea when you are doing more gamist style of play, but not necessarily. Which
most people do. Like most off-camera RPGs are a balance between role-playing and gamist, and far more on the gamist side of the spectrum because that's the way the systems are built.
Yeah, I mean,
So
especially
you
when
just find yourself going that way unless there's a camera, which is why I don't play RPGs off camera anymore.
Yeah, I mean, especially like D&D in particular is a system that facilitates a more gamist style of play, as opposed to a more strictly narrative style of play. But there are other, like, especially within like indie RPGs, and the Apocalypse World system kind of falls to the other side of it, facilitating a lot more narrative. But I have a lot of thoughts on splitting the party, and most of it comes with related to things about creating stuff on the fly. So we'll also be talking about that.
Yeah, we should totally do an entire Don't Split the Party episode.
Yeah. Do split the party. Split it like a banana.
That's what I was thinking too. Banana split the party. I'm upset that my Stream Deck keeps going dark, and I don't know why.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, that's all right. It's fine.
So we'll talk about splitting the party, balancing and generating things on the fly when we get more into like actually playing. Post-session stuff, first episode stuff, world building stuff. What was the other? I have like going back to my list of things. We talked about. You talked about the type of game in terms of Anna Banana Party splitting cabana. I like it.
Sorry. Say again?
You talked about wanting to focus more on a narrative style of play. The other one would be the tone. What sort of overall tone? Like you mentioned Rat Queens, which to me is inherently more comedic than, say, like other...
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings, yeah.
Yes. And that's part of why I mentioned Rat Queens, is because I want it to be less serious. When I say Rat Queens, people instantly know we are not going Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, serious and dark and gritty and whatever. We're not going there. Well, it might be dark and gritty, but not serious. To me, Rat Queens is very much is very much funny in a way that real life is funny. It's not Mayhem and Misfits.
It's funny because it's true.
Yeah, it's not Mayhem and Misfits where we're going over the top, comedic, and inventing the skateboard out of some wheels and a barrel, and it was after you left, and making an entire business out of it. But it's comedic in the same way that I would make jokes if I was in those situations, and that's the feel that I'm going for. A little more realistic in the sense of when people are funny, how people use humor to diffuse awkwardness and tension and things like that. And you don't see those jokes in Lord of the Rings generally. They added a couple in the movies, but only because they had to, I think. So a little bit more relaxed in that way. And also it says that, or at least it starts the conversation, that you are not the first line of defense or the last line of defense for the world. You are not going to be dealing with epic world-ending catastrophes and calamities. Or if you are, nobody's really going to know that it was you. You're not doing this. You're not going to be world-renowned adventurers at the end of this campaign. You're going to be the people that were in the background helping the other group save the day. That sort of a feel.
So everything you just said, make sure you tell that to your players.
I have, actually.
Perfect.
That's specifically why I bring up Rat Queens, because it starts that conversation.
Yeah, so that's definitely... tone and style are kind of two of the things. Oh.
We got one from The Confused Monkey 11 minutes ago. Does a swallow need a natural 20 to be able to carry a coconut?
I don't know, what's the strength stat of the swallow and how heavy is the coconut?
I would say it probably is going to need a nat 20, unless it's had an enlarge or a strength spell, or, I mean...
What if it's
the
just a
physics of it are
magical
just
swallow?
baffling. All right, and now I'm going to scroll up, and because we missed a couple.
How freeform, and players want to do things. We'll talk about that's related to coming up with stuff on the fly, and a lot of that's personal preference. or comfort. And also Grinny's question about staying focused. That's probably another one we're going to talk about in terms of like self-care during games. What to do like while you're playing. Also, is it an African or European swallow?
It's a very good question.
It's a good question.
It's very.
I'm just gonna knock back with popcorn.
What? Not breakfast popcorn?
Knock back this popcorn.
Yeah. So, yeah, okay.
Okay.
Great.
So, tone, style, got those things, communicated those to your players. I think one of your main pieces of homework is, over the next little bit, is talking to your players and getting that information from them, talking to all your players.
To players. Yes. Okay.
But particularly about the sorts of characters that they're thinking of playing, so that can help inform either overall narrative, how you want to do that first episode and start and bring them together. So that, because that can easily build off of each other where you're like, oh, they give me this nugget of idea and things like that. But if you need nuggets from them or want nuggets from them, then you got to get it. I don't know why I keep using the word nugget. In terms of D&D, there's also some like mechanical questions to ask. You mentioned not wanting to start at level 1. What level do you want to start at? 2?
I think 2 is enough. It's because I'm not a brutal GM. Like they're not going to have a high risk of death at any given point, just because that's not how I want to necessarily build tension. Mm-hmm. So I think level 2 will be fine, and we'll go through level 1 in the session 0.
My one hesitation with doing that, it's not necessarily a bad idea, especially because 1 and 2, the main things that change, I think, is your number of hit points. But part of what session 0 is helpful for is that learning your character. So when you do a big jump where you get a bunch of new abilities, there's a new relearning that character again. And so I would hesitate doing a lower level and then having them level up and then start playing again, because then you're going to still run into that issue of like the very first episode they're on camera, they're actually dealing with a character sheet they're not as familiar with.
That makes sense.
It's not like a don't definitely do that, but just something to bear in mind. I think between 1 and 2, it doesn't change that much. If you were doing like 2 and then 3, I wouldn't do that, because like you get a bunch of new stuff at level 3 in D&D.
Yep. And level 4. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So some of the other stuff, there are other mechanical things that you'll want to think about with D&D, and these are decisions you can make at some point, but how you deal... death is always an interesting one. D&D has a lot more rules surrounding it than some systems I've played, where it's like when you hit 0, you're dead, and that's just it. But deciding how you want to deal with death in a RPG show is, I think, more so than with... hello, Nat's right. Thank you for the raid.
I don't think they're actually here yet. Oh. It's an early warning.
Okay. Then we will be ready.
Yes. We don't have a raid response, so because we need emotes.
So one of the things to think about is death is
there it is.
Perfect.
It's an early raid warning. No, that's what that is. It's totally an early raid warning. That's right. Thank you so much for the raid. Raiders, welcome on in, and thank you for coming by.
I like that it's the Nat Pack.
Yeah.
It's a really cute name. Hello and welcome. Do you want to introduce who we are and what we're doing, or do you want me to do that?
I want you to do it because you're more practiced at it, and I'm learning from you.
My name is Random Tuesday. This is Anna Geeks, and you're watching GeekSpaceTV, a nonprofit streaming studio in the Seattle area, promoting and increasing diversity and inclusion within gaming and geek spaces. And today, we're doing Behind the Screens, our show where we talk about starting and running and playing tabletop RPGs. Like, what system are you playing?
Dungeons and Dragons?
I wanted you to do that.
Oh, all right. Yeah, that's I'm going to have to find an NPC who's like someone super serious, like the lord of the town or something like that. They talks like this. I've got this adventure to send you all on. This is very serious and dire.
Oh, God. It's going to be like update.
Carrot. Oh, goodness.
So death is something that you want to think about. And I my general feeling is that you can make this decision as a GM. You can play the rules as written. There's nothing wrong with either of those things. You can also decide more collaboratively as a group how you want to handle death in an RPG. And a lot of people just go for the rules as written. I find a personal amount of hesitation in wanting to use the rules as written in a lot of systems. Like, I made a very concrete decision early on in Shadowrun because that system is very murder, murder, death, death. It's very easy to die, and for me, in a narrative, it's important that it's interesting when players die. And like, I was in an RPG once when it was a home game, and like one of our friends, he was playing a Revenant, and Revenants can just stay conscious when they're in negative hit points, and so he was literally at like negative quarter of his health or whatever. He had one negative hit point that he could lose before he was just dead, because he wasn't because you don't have to make death saving throws, and he got popped with a magic missile by a guard as he was escaping, and he died. And we were all like, well, that was disappointing. And so it's like, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's also like, that was disappointing. And so for me, I made a decision when running a show that if someone was going to die, it was a thing. Like, it was going to be interesting. There was going to be stakes related to it. And so, fun fact, in Shadowrun, basically, if they didn't tell me that their character was dead, their character was not dead, even if they had wiped all of their boxes. But that's a much more punishing system. D&D has death saving throws, has systems for getting around stuff like that. And so that's something that you probably want to think about for yourself and with your players. Do you want to use rules as written? Do you want to come up with some other sort of more concrete decisions? And some systems have, like, Shadowrun doesn't have rules a way out. Once you're dead, you're dead. A system like D&D has resurrection as a thing, and so do you decide, is that something that they're going to be able to do? And you don't necessarily have to have all the nitty-gritty decided, but it is a thing that can happen in RPGs, and so you want to have some forethought into that, and ask your players what their opinions are on it too.
That's what I just wrote down.
Yeah.
Talk about death.
Talk about death. I know someone who likes to do that, so, but for real life, not for RPG characters.
That's not at all surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Seattle after all.
It's literally like, it's her jam right now.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with not having it. There are systems where the players can decide. But it's a conversation that you should have as part of setting up your RPG. Oh, this was a thing that I meant to point out earlier.
Okay.
Before I forget. Hold on to your thing. There's a tool that if you want to look it up, it's not the be all and end all, but it is a good place to start if you're not sure what to do in conversations before you get started. It's called the Same Page tool. Trooper SGP can probably point it out if mods can give him permission to post a link because he sent it to me. And that's a good sort of like list of questions to kind of start with to get everybody on the same page.
What I was going to say is, somebody asked, how are you going to build tension if there's no real risk of death? There are a lot of different ways to suffer loss or potentially suffer loss without the character needing to die. Yeah.
Loss, I mean, gouged some people's eyes out. I've jeopardized family and friends, and NPCs are, so one of my favorite things, it's actually I think it's in Monster Hearts and also Apocalypse World rules, is to treat your NPCs like stolen cars. So kind of use them and lose them and kind of use them recklessly, make them exciting and shiny, but don't hold on to them. One of the things that we'll say in like improv is kill your darlings. And be ready to like get rid of things. So if a player is like, I have this very important person in my character's life, and you're like, they're mine now, I shall jeopardize them for some reason. There are many things that can be lost, from sanity to well-being to wealth. The trick is finding what is important for your character.
Which is why I'm going to ask, what is important to the characters?
Those are good things to know. And some of that you can just glean from them as you, it's like a nice give and take. As you put something in front of them and you sort of see what they pick up, you're like, this one works, this one does not.
And this isn't necessarily, like, I'm not asking them this for use against them as much as to help them build their characters, to help them. These are people who are all new to D&D, or, you know, varying to, by my standards, they're all new to D&D. So
By your standards, I'm new to D&D.
yes. So so it'll help them develop who their character is going to be. Gritty was asking about whether or not
To read or not to read?
the rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one. I want to say yes. As a teacher, I want you to do your homework as a player, and I want you to read the rules. As someone who has read many rule books and knows that they are sometimes very long, that is an unrealistic expectation. So one of the things that I will try and do as someone running a game is identify the most important pages that they should read. So be like, you should read this page and this page and this page, and like give them a reasonable amount of reading. And like, because like in D&D, there's swaths of the player's handbook you can skip through. Like, you don't need to read all of the other classes. Like, you don't need to read all of the other, so there's stuff to skip through. I am also a huge fan of cheat sheets. I have made them for all of the long-term systems that I've done. Systems that come with them are my favorite. Like Monster Hearts, thank you. It was like, here's everything. I was like, yes, I'll take this one. I made one for Stars Without Number. I made several for Shadowrun because you can't fit that all on one page. And D&D is one that there's a ton of resources, but having like a two-sided or a single page that people can quick reference is really handy. Claudia made one for us for OVA. And so like being like, here's your sheet, and then read these pages in the rule book is normally a good middle ground to telling someone to read the whole rule book. If there's no rule book and it's your own homemade system of rules, you should have written a rule book or you should have codified your system in some way, unless
at the very least have created your own cheat sheets.
Yeah. Do you need to explain? So players don't necessarily hidden information. That's a whole nother thing we should talk about. What do people need to know and not know? I'm writing a list.
This is a whole series, everyone, so don't worry if we don't really answer your question today. I figured that today would be a lot of this sort of like setting the ground for like, because mostly answering chat's questions and stuff, but
I've also run one-shots with people who like are gonna be in the session once and they may never play that RPG again, and I'm like, you don't expect you to read this. Like, that's unfair. We'll talk about hidden information, both from players hiding things and GMs hiding things, because I think it's both good and bad, like with many things.
Ozai, I'm pretty sure I can answer that one. Improvise.
Yeah. But there are more detailed, we can talk a little bit more about like certain types of ways you can strategize around that, because there's kind of 3 main things you can do. I want to think, like, what do I do when they go entirely off the rails? But some of that also comes into the way you plan. And I'm at a point now where I play with enough players that I can anticipate going off the rails, that I don't bother really with rails. And so I've adjusted the way I plan to make my life easier, knowing that they would never do what I wanted in the first place.
And that is definitely, like, that knowledge that you've gained there is definitely something that I want to, like, glean. Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure we'll talk about it more in an episode, but, like, I mentioned how I've got the basic plot for their first, like, adventure. And I've set it up so that they'll be offered a job, and they can not take it. They've got, I think, 3 or 4 ways they can respond to the rails that I have presented to them. They can take the job, and then I know what path they're going on. They're on the rails. They can not take the job, and then I know what path they're going on. Or they can find their own path, which is usually what players seem to do. And that one's a little bit more difficult to deal with, but the seeds of that adventure are still there. And there are things, for me, it was more important to plan what is going to happen if they choose one of these 3 things. What happens if they follow this plot line? Where does it lead? What happens if they don't follow this plot line? Where does it lead? Where does the plot line itself still go? And how is it going to come back and affect them later on? And so planning that to me was a little bit more important than trying to figure out a way to keep them on the rails, because that's not what people want. They go off the rails for a reason.
I have a lot of ideas or some ways I think about like creating things. One of the things I do like to try and remind players, especially in a show, is that you are playing characters that are worth telling a story about. Therefore, you need to probably be the sort of characters that at least do things, because we don't tend to tell stories about people that don't do anything. Whether that means you don't take the job, but you are not taking it actively as opposed to not taking it passively. So that's kind of a good reminder for people doing a streamed RPG, is that you are a show. People should have a reason to watch you.
Yeah.
And being boring is not normally one of them.
Yeah. I have about 5 NPCs loosely planned so far.
Disappointingly small number of NPCs, would Claudia say.
Whatever.
She only had 10 this season. God. So I will talk about like, maybe I'll do like a sample. I'll plan a one-shot like sample module or something. I go home and knit a scarf? Probably not. Did I know fully everything about the big bad I introduced, the raise prior to the first session? It really depends. So with that one, one of the other things we're going to talk about is like long-term narrative planning. So there's like the short term, there's your single episode, there's your sort of narrative segment, and then there's like your long term. My long term is normally pretty broad. You have a goal, but I have no idea necessarily how you're going to get there, and then I break it. The closer I get into the single episode that I'm doing, the more I break it into like a manageable chunks of action. I had designed most of the race. Actually, that's a thing that I'm going to be throwing up all of my season 1 notes and possibly some of my random scrawling, including my page where I did all the math about how I calculated tritium years. And that's probably going to go up onto
your Patreon.
My Patreon.
Yeah.
Just for, if you want to look at them, you're welcome to.
Just
but,
like my planning stuff will end up on my Patreon. Steph's is on Steph's Patreon. This is one of the ways we like to support our creators.
It's pretty great. So in terms of long-term stuff, I have some ideas about what that looks like. I have the race designed and their motivations and their intended actions.
So Katie Cat has asked this one a few times. I'm going to answer it really quickly. In terms of building a character, is it okay for the player to want their character to be private? I'm assuming from the other characters. Yes, as long as they're familiar with the fact that it is, once again, a collaborative game.
That's also a specific thing that I'm going to talk about in terms of hidden information, because I mean that is information hidden between players, information hidden between the GM and the players. Because sometimes players, I generally don't think players need to tell me everything as a GM, but the flip side of that is if they want me to use something about their character, I do need to know about it. They're like, why haven't you ever brought up my backstory? I'll be like, because you've never told me your backstory. Yeah. But there's different relationships in terms of what information is kept hidden, and I can give you examples of where it is good and where it is bad, and that goes into backstory.
And it all, also the private information thing all depends on that particular group, too. Grinny, if we missed one of your questions, feel free to ask it again, because I definitely didn't see
is
it.
Short.
And
and words are long.
We're looking at the dashboard right now, and I've zoomed in a little, so it scrolls pretty quickly. But sorry, we'll work on improving this setup. But.
So yeah, different thoughts on hidden information. Just deep breaths. Hidden information. What were some?
There's just so much tech that we need behind the scenes.
This is behind the screens, Anna.
Yeah, but behind the scenes of behind the screens.
It's a whole nother show. Meta. Shows within shows. I asked you that question. Excellent.
And Paladin Hulk says information can be shared with players but hidden from their characters. If you've got the right group, yeah.
Yes.
And with a lot of streamed RPGs, that tends to be the case. The character doesn't know the thing, but the player might, because you're all trying to build a narrative for a show as well as playing a game. So you've got a little more wiggle room in terms of that when you're playing an RPG show, because people are more interested in telling that collaborative story than they are one-upping the player next to them.
Yeah. So we'll do a whole section on like hidden information.
Yeah.
And how that can work, when it can work well and when it can be potentially problematic, things you want to do and want to avoid. Related to that, oh god, there was something, and then I saw a question in chat.
Hang
and
on,
I
hang on.
completely forgot it.
Because Fractali, behind the scenes of Behind the Screens, is the after show talk show we were planning on recording.
It's true.
Oh my goodness, we're totally going to call that Behind the Scenes of Behind the Screens.
How many NPCs would I consider? Oh, NPCs will definitely be something we're going to talk more about. I am not Claudia. And this is a good example of what Claudia did is not wrong and what I do is not wrong. I tend to design at most 2 NPCs an episode. I try to avoid more than that. And I'll talk more about like some of my things that I do specifically about NPCs interacting with PCs. Claudia designs all of her NPCs up front and has a lot of them, and then we encounter them over the course of several episodes. So like Claudia designed 20 NPCs that we encountered over the course of 5 episodes. I design on a session-by-session basis. Like, I create NPCs to fulfill a purpose. So there's definitely, there's so many different ways of approaching it, and you'll find your one that you're most comfortable with. But Claudia made so many.
So for me, my thinking is I would rather have a bunch of throwaway people that I can make up on the spot, which ties back, somebody mentioned a name generator, which definitely going to need.
Really helpful.
But for me, I would rather have a bunch of throwaway people that I can make up on the spot and a few really well fleshed out NPCs that are engaging, that are recurring, than make a whole bunch of people that like build the entire town and not know what they're going to use out of that. Especially me, where I have extremely limited time to build this campaign because I have a studio to run. I need to find that balance of only creating what I'm going to use. And you never know what that's going to be too. So
yeah, and that is like, I think one of the reasons people overplan is because it's less scary. So like, again, there's no strict rule of the amount of time I spend planning in relation to the amount of episode. My planning is very, I plan a lot, and then that'll last me several weeks. So like some weeks I will plan for 0 hours or like 30 minutes to like refresh my memory. And then other weeks I'll be like, I have spent 3 hours planning today. And that is because it goes for more than one session.
Ozai's question about evil PCs in a good group, even if they're not working against the group. Evil players is something, or evil characters, something that has never interested me. Yeah. I'm not interested in telling those stories. I see enough of that in the world, and I'm trying to make the world better. I don't need to like add evil. It's just not my jam.
And that's similar, like that I think is 100% personal preference.
Again, okay if it's yours. It's just not mine.
I've known people who run a campaign of entirely evil characters. And that's up to you. I also have more gone away from using the strict alignment system of D&D. It's a really useful tool, especially for new players or groups or inexperienced groups, or less narrative focus. It kind of gives you like a good touchstone of knowing what to do. But because I like more complex characters who might be evil in like in this one particular way of they do something, and then they're like amazing saints in this other particular way. I find that more interesting, so I don't require players to identify their alignment.
I think that the alignment system is fundamentally flawed and broken and only useful as guidelines, like vague.
They're more like guidelines anyway.
Yeah. But also, I am interested in, and I make it very clear that I am interested in telling stories about people doing the right thing because it's the right thing. That's what interests me as a person collaboratively crafting this story. That's what interests me. So I want players that are interested in telling that. And do they have to be saints? Of course not. Rat Queens is the inspiration. They may begrudgingly do it, but they're still going to save the world if it's their job to save the world, because if they don't, then everybody's screwed, including them. Things like that. And then Katie Cat, if you have a question for Matt Mercer, ask Matt Mercer. He's very responsive on Twitter. Did we miss something that you wanted?
No, I wanted to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, or add this to the things to talk to your players about. That's like, again, an important piece for them to know, because oftentimes the core of a lot of the systems, like the setup for them, is that you're doing jobs, right? So in D&D, you're adventurers, you get paid to do a job for someone. In Shadowrun, you're Shadowrunners, you get paid to do a job for someone. So the motivations of characters are very often financial, because that's your reward system. That's how you get new stuff. That's how you get new gear. So money is something, and XP and gold, or however you're doing it, are things that you're going to want to talk about with your players. Are you going to ask them to track those things? Are you going to milestone as your leveling up system? Telling them that it is important to you that they choose to be on a job or a mission more, or whatever it is that they're doing, not just because of the financial benefit, or being able to justify why they're doing it is also important, because I don't tend to track funds. I would rather simply be able to tell players, you can afford to buy some new stuff. What do you want to buy? And then I can tell them if they can afford it or not, rather than being like, this job pays you this much money, because I am bored and I don't care about it. But like so many systems, that's how you make your character better.
And again, it comes down to the players as well. And again, talking about Critical Role, like, I find that is an interesting dynamic that the players deal with, at least in that show. So it can be an interesting thing, but it can be just as interesting if you just gloss over it and push the narrative forward. So again, it's personal flavor.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to accurately track gold and XP or any of those things. It is not something that I am personally interested in, and therefore I do not do it. And so that's just kind of a thing that you talk about your players with, of how they're going to level, how they're going to make their characters better. I tend to, with RPGs, with D&D, I do milestones. That's how I've always done it, because I didn't like that you couldn't effectively reward people for non-combat solutions in their sort of traditional system, especially in 4th edition, and even 5th. Like, that's one of the failings I think the system has.
Yeah, absolutely.
XP can only really effectively be tracked in terms of fights. But even then, it's also like this monster, and you're like, well, what if I change this monster? Like, how much does that change their XP and all of that stuff? And it's part of eventually why I got, like, I tried really hard to work around the making money in Shadowrun, but I literally set them up with a retainer. Like, that was my strategy. I was like, you are just on retainer for this company, which means all of your basic expenses will be covered, assuming you don't want to buy anything dramatic. Like, you can buy bullets, like, you can do these things. And that's how I got around it, because I didn't want to deal with it.
In my head, it's up to the group, in my opinion. But we touched on something that I want to talk about more at some point, which is how to set up those milestones for XP in particular. Money, I'm planning on actually dealing with money. I'm planning on giving them jobs that'll and loot and things like that. But setting up the XP milestones is something that I have never had to do at all, but is very much how I want to do that. Like I want them to be rewarded for non-combat solutions and not from yeah. So that's something I want to talk more about and get advice on at some point.
Milestones leveling and XP. So the making money, dealing with that, there's a few ways you can deal with money in different ways. I tend to provide a lot of things that players need that would be of a significant expense for them, with the contingency that it normally belongs to someone else. So when I don't want them to have it anymore, they don't. So like Leviathan, they have a really good ship access to. It's not their ship. It is actively alive and belongs to no one. But it's a really good ship. And so if I need them to have a very effective mode of transportation, they have it. If I don't need them to have it, I can take it away. So that's one of the ways I like to ground it. With Stars Without Number, there's not as much gear. There's like treasury sort of items, and then there's like your basic gear. And so at some point, I need to remind the players for Season 3, like, you can get some better gear if you look at what you have and get something like a couple steps up from it, like that's what you can afford. Or I'll give them a budget for leveling up. But I'd rather a player be like, oh, especially because I enjoy like players wanting to kind of create their own thing or look for something a little bit more specific that might serve a different function, like making a magic item or something like that, then we can kind of finagle our way around it. And I'd be like, okay. Or like I do a trade-off. So like Thea got her implant, which she would never have been able to afford, but it has a bug, which is fun for me. If she like rolls a certain way, I think like it has glitches and things like that. So
I wasn't sure if you meant a bug as in she's being watched, which would be super cool, or like
I'm not gonna tell you that one.
A bug as in it's busted.
Yeah. Or like Fang, I gave her a fancy new cyber arm because like it's so hard to afford it. I was never going to be able to like give them enough money, and I was like, you get this fancy arm because you're going to be someone's science experiment, and if you ever critically glitch, your arm just turns off. It's only for one round of combat, but when you consider that normally,
reboot.
Yeah, it was a 3-second reboot, and we would normally get through 2 rounds of combat for Shadowrun, and I'd be like, you will be running with one arm if you ever critically glitch, and it was really like I was like, that is an effective trade-off for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like to. There are other ways you can get around tracking money, but there's also nothing wrong with tracking money. And then the question is, are you going to ask the players to keep that for themselves, or are you going to keep it? Because sometimes there's trust issues or just like knowing some people's ability to keep track of numbers is going to vary. And so if you need them to keep track of it,
how do you deal with that? Yeah.
I
don't think we've...
Were there any others? Jobs connected to narrative?
Maybe. Not telling.
There's a couple more.
Yeah, as we're like, do we have questions? They're
questions?
like, boom.
So these are good ones.
Also, did we cover everything you wanted to cover today? Because we've got about 25 minutes left.
We do. I think the main ones, and this actually relates into my last question for you, because probably what we'll talk about next week is world building, because I think that's a good place to start, because you need to make some decisions before you can actually tell a story in a world. And that relates to what information do you have about your world now beyond kind of your theme and your style? And that relates to the question of things like, are you going to want or need to put restrictions in character creation? Is it, like, I know you talked about things like elves only using female pronouns, but does that mean elves are agender or things like that? And so, talk about your world. What do you got?
Well, for a start, I had mentioned that I think elves. So there's this book. There's a series of books. The ancillary series. That's not what it's actually called, but they all start with ancillary justice, ancillary mercy, and ancillary sword. I don't know if they're in that order, but and in it the culture that the main character comes from only uses female pronouns. And I thought and reading it messes with your mind in such a delightful way that I'm like, I'm gonna put that in, and what culture am I gonna make it? Psh, elves, of course. So I pretty much decided that the elves only use female pronouns because they don't really care about gender. It just doesn't make as much sense to them. Whereas dwarves are probably going to be gender neutral because they all have beards.
Lovely.
Which leads to you don't know, and it's none of your business. So I have little anecdotes like that, but generally speaking, and Pumpkin was asking if I'm giving them any limitations on what they can be, and not really. Like, I've flat out told them, like, if you have a cool idea for a species that you want to have in the game, then we'll try and make it work. That said, there are certain things that that are blacklisted that I'm gonna be like, no. But none of them are. They're not likely to pick any of those anyway. So, Imperial Ratch, yes, thank you, Captain Sardonic.
So,
go ahead.
Related to that, like, are you, because obviously D&D is one of those interesting ones where it has like its own world and its own lore, and you can mostly pull it out of that pretty effectively, but to an extent there are things you need to replace, like, because a portion of the magic is considered like religious magic. So are you going to be creating things to think about, like your own pantheon?
Yeah, I hadn't really decided on that. Probably not, but it also kind of depends on the player at this point. I wanted to give them the freedom to make their own if they want to.
Because there's more than one way you can go about that, so we can kind of talk about that next week. But things like, are you going to keep all of the core races? Like, is there going to be dragonborns, tieflings, elves, and like all of those pieces? Are you going to think about potentially having some of them be, your players can choose them, but they're not common within the world, and therefore, like, how do people react to the existence of those? Or is it kind of just a blanket, everybody exists? Do you want, like, is it going to be like the Shadowrun kind of meta-humanity, or are you going to do the way D&D frames itself, which is essentially everyone exists everywhere all of the time?
I don't know.
These are the questions I will ask. If you don't know, that's fine.
I think I know what I want, which is replacing at least a few of the core races or the core species with other things, but I don't know that practically I have the time to do that in any meaningful way. So I really kind of haven't totally decided on that yet. But I am always looking for good ways to mess with people's heads a bit in that aspect of the narrative. So for example, how everyone assumes that, like, orcs are barbaric and not don't have a lot of culture or sophistication or anything like that, and it's like, well, that's kind of BS from a variety of different standpoints, and so looking at how I can I can't think of a better way to word it. So looking for ways that I can queer that narrative, that I can bend that and change it to subvert it to my will.
That makes sense. There are cool. Those are questions that I will create you some questions for next week, so you can do some. I'll give you actual homework for next week, not like joke homework where I created a fake syllabus.
Yeah.
So Pumpkin, related to your question, I pretty much always would recommend at least one session where people meet and talk about their characters in person. What is normally helpful is beforehand giving some context of, like, this is your setup, like, you are going to be a group together in some way or for some reason. Here are any restrictions that I am giving you related to character generation in the system. Here's the information on character generation. And asking people to come with some ideas is normally a good thing to do. Like they don't need to have everything figured out, but if they're coming, they're like, oh, it's less helpful. And then you meet and you build characters, and then they can go and take them away and finish them.
Paladin Hulk, don't mistake a thematic element as a theme for the entire world. Like that is something that I want for flavor. It's over there, and we don't really worry about it all that much. It's just flavor for the world, not necessarily a theme of the campaign or a theme of the world at large. It was just kind of an idea that I had one day and was like, that would be cool. And I'm still not even 100% on any aspect of that. Like, it's a little redundant too. There's a bit of overlap between that. How do I want to deal with that? So yeah, I don't know, it's just an idea.
So some of the other things to think about for world building would be like geographic location. You don't necessarily have to go out and make an intricate or detailed map, but there is a certain amount of, if it is taking place on a continent or in a country, like knowing kind of your scale for the characters, and then some major features that you might want to have. Because like, there's nothing wrong with a largely unfilled map, but knowing that you're like, it takes place on a continent, therefore I have access to any of the geographic features, or it takes place in a single city, or and the smaller it is, normally the more detail you might fill in, but knowing
like that big
scale
magic city that I was talking about, how far are they from that?
Yeah.
That sort of a thing. Yeah.
So I'm just making notes.
Will this show be going on after your D&D show launches, and if so, what will the content be? The same. Yes, this is a new permanent show on the channel. We're just starting it earlier than Season 3 because we need to do some prior building
I
stuff.
do like maps, though, if he is correct, so...
Okay. Okay.
You don't need to have a map. It's okay. You don't have to. That's been one of, like, the sadder parts about running a space show, is I'm like, I can't really... I have a sort of map of the galaxy, but, like, it's not, like, on a continent where I can draw a map.
Frithio, I need to hire you to make me a map. That's how I do it.
Extra credit. Yeah, that's the only time I give extra credit is...
if I make maps.
Is if you make maps.
All right, let me get the graph paper.
Magic is the other question. Thank you for reminding me, Our Green Paradox. How does magic tie into your world? Because again, the arcane versus divine. That's the one. I was like, what is the dive? I wrote dive. Fixed it. So thinking about how magic fits in with your world and what that looks like, obviously D&D is one that is almost impossible to completely remove the magic from it unless you either choose to very extensively port it.
I feel like really quick I should address the question further about this being a permanent show. A lot of it is going to be Lauren giving me tips for the show, but long term this show is going to be about GM roundtable type discussions. We do plan on having guests. We do plan on like covering different subjects, even if they aren't necessarily 100% relevant to either of our shows. We still want to have discussions about how to be a better GM, how we can each be better, and like learn from the various wonderful GMs in the Seattle area, of which there are many. And outside of the Seattle area, visitors to the Seattle, and so on and so on. Yeah.
That's related to the curriculum question.
Yeah.
Some of it is because I personally get very frustrated when I see GM roundtables of only white guys. And I'm like, you're fine.
Yeah. And that's,
Bored.
I think that is a central theme for this show. Like long term is having it be more of a GM roundtable that fits the theme of the network.
One of the other things I think that we will also think about is when not just GMs but also players, like, because that I think is an important piece that we often forget about, because like the GMing is a lot of work, but the players, especially in a show and a live stream show, it's also like the player perspective is important. Like, what are things you do to make the performance good? How do you build a character that's compelling? What does the player end of it look like? And so once we know how to make the show, like pulling in the other resources and other people, about how that works too. So yeah, that's the plan.
So I'm sorry, we were talking about magic.
We're talking about magic. So so we got a lot of topics for next week. You have a long list of things to think about.
Great.
To go with your other long list of things to think about.
Oh, trooper.
There's
not talking about politics on camera.
A wonderful joke in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which for the most part is a show that I enjoy very much. And it was just them going to a convention. They had an entire con episode, and they're like, the three of them walk into a panel, and the panel is titled like diversity in writing, and it's just
all
white guys,
yeah.
and they're just like, really, really diverse panel you got there. And I'm like, thank you.
Yeah.
I love Rosa.
So, I just realized that I never focused the camera at the beginning of the show.
Have we been slightly out of focus this whole time?
I don't know, probably.
Maybe to you.
Wasn't bad enough for anyone to complain. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we're out of popcorn and our beautiful little. I put stickers on it. If anybody's curious, we didn't pay for an actual cup for popcorn with our logo on it. I put stickers on it. I'm sorry. I'm being responsible with our money.
Responsibility is so
The clock
dumb.
is nicely in focus. I don't believe that.
Here, I'll just put it.
Because we're actually
Am I
further
nicely
away
in
than the
focus
last time
now?
I focused. Whatever.
Am I
Anyway.
nicely in focus?
So, magic in the world. I had talked about how I want a lot of mundane magical items, and this ties back with the conversation. This is why I start the conversation with, I want it to be kind of like Rat Queens. Is because in Rat Queens, as an example, one of the characters has a flat stone that they use to call Dad. And Dad is in hell, or something similar, and it only works between the two of them, but it's one mundane magical item, as I put it. I want there to be things like magical mixing spoons. If you think about a world that has magic in it, the people that can control it are not just going to be making offensive, adventuring-oriented spells. They're going to be using them for practical applications as well. And so that is something that I want to kind of permeate. Rocky Talkies? Yes, Rocky Talkies.
Can they be called that?
They're not going to be very common. And they're only, okay, Rocky Talkies. Yes. Yep. Sure. So anyway, but like magical mixing spoons where there's practical applications for these things. And is everyone going to have a magical mixing spoon in their home? No. And the idea has evolved to that sort of logic being centered on this one particular city. And the further you're away from that city you get, the less likely you are to find a magical mixing spoon. But the closer you are to that city, the more likely the lower rungs, the lower tiers of society are going to have that sort of thing in their homes. So,
are you almost thinking in a sort of analogous way, the way a lot of industrial technology was in homes in kind of the first half of the 19th century, or 1900s, I should say?
Probably.
The kind of like the presence, like people who could afford it had TVs first, and most people had a radio or didn't have or the kind of that level of the prevalence of technology, but in this case magic.
Yeah. And even so far as like power, so indoor lights and things like that started in cities first before they could run power lines out to them. And so it's not going to be quite like that, but then you'll also find really old mixing spoons that were like that the family got a few generations ago, and it's kind of wonky, so it stirs, but then every once in a while it just flicks flour everywhere or whatever. So that's sort of a pervasive layer of mundane magical items. I don't know what else to call them. So there was somebody, evil child banshee face with 24 dice. Good. I don't know.
Sounds like a you idea,
know.
Evie.
I don't know.
SMS sorcerer's messaging system. Do I allow players to go on adventures? It depends on the complexity with which they would like that adventure to take place. So the sort of simple downtime activities that might take one or two rolls and maybe one sort of unimportant NPC, definitely. But I don't, because I am telling a story about a group of people, I don't want one person's thing to take up all of the time. So if I'm like, this is a full mission, like I had a solid example of one of those, I think, at one point in Shadowrun, where Claudia was like, she wanted to do something that was essentially an entire she wanted to break into a police station and like steal evidence documents and get out. And I'm like, we can't do that in downtime. Like, that's an entire session. And so when it's something that would be an entire session, then I say no. And I plan that as an entire session later on. But otherwise, yeah, like there will be times where players will want to do things and I'll roll with it and we'll do a little side mission. But it really depends on how elaborate I think it's going to be. Yeah, the one with evidence written on the box. It wasn't actually in the box. I was just being an ass.
I also, something that I do need to think about a bit more is the role that divine magic plays in that. Because I don't think that there would be a divine mixing spoon unless there's a god of pastries. Like, which there could be, but I don't know.
One of the things you also want to, like, in D&D especially, there is an artificer class, and there are, like, it's
now.
And so, like, looking at that as how do they deal with it? How does the artificing class works? Because that's what a lot of that sort of magical technology sounds like. But also, yes, I would like there to be a god of pastries.
I think there will be now. There will be an entire pastry cult.
A pastreon? Instead of a pantheon?
I don't think that one really works that well.
I tried!
I'm sorry.
It's a halfling deity.
Yeah.
There's a reason why I'm a hobbit. I'm a halfling.
On my personal channel, Wednesdays are generally going to be my baking days. So, yeah, you're going to win out on that one.
Yes!
Yeah.
We chose the right day to do this.
Yeah.
It's run by brownies. It's a cult of brownies.
It's the brownie god. God of pastries.
Yeah, that
Sure.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So, yes.
I'm sorry that you can hear the neighbors. There's nothing I can do about that right now.
Pots and Pantheon.
Psionics, yes or no? Have they made psionic rules? Yeah.
I think they had them
For
in
fifth?
the they have an example class the same way they had the artificer. I don't think it's officially released yet. It's on the
got it.
what is the thing they call it? It's not. Is it Unearthed
D&D
Arcana?
Beyond. No.
There's a specific place where the like unreleased classes that are in like playtesting are, and I think it's Unearthed Arcana. It's also where they test out like additional versions of it, so that's something
Got
to
it.
decide for yourself too. Is like, are you gonna let players use stuff from there? You have inexperienced players, so it's probably not a great idea.
I'm planning to keep it all as reasonably
Unearthed
simple as possible because people are still relatively new either to the system or whatnot. So so generally speaking, I'm not going to go for a lot of add-on rules. Like there probably won't be an artificer class that ever gets dealt with, or at least not that gets dealt with anytime soon.
Yeah.
Most of the things that I have thought of for that mundane magic revolve around one cantrip: prestidigitation. Best spell ever. But you stop and think about that, and there are going to be entire professions based around being able to cast prestidigitation. You would be the best cleaner in the city. Right there. Just that one thing. Best hairstylist. Best chef. Just that one spell. Would you like this mud pie? It tastes like chocolate.
Oh, God.
I'm just saying, prestidigitation is the most powerful spell.
Fair. I mean, I know a lot of people who agree with you, so I've never played any class with prestidigitation, and as far as I'm concerned, Speak for the Animals is the best spell, so...
It's fair.
Because there's always animals. They're always around, and you just need to know how to talk to them. Also, the What Animal Will Solve My Problem is a fun game to play.
Yeah. That was a good season.
Yeah. That was legit how I played that character. I was
We
like,
basically
what
played
animal will solve my
ourselves.
problem?
So we've got like 3 minutes left
God.
of live time. Yeah.
In 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you all so much for joining us. There's going to be another show in 3 hours called High School Royale.
You're right. It is in 3 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have at least another half hour, maybe an hour of time to plan stuff off camera. I don't know if we'll record today. We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, that's thank you all for joining us. Thank you for the donations that came in and for the raid. That's right, very much appreciated. And for everybody for hosting and hanging out and chatting with us and asking questions and sharing the link and
Is there a channel in Discord?
I created one this morning.
Good. I will try and pop in there and we can...
I don't think I'll create a specific cast only channel because that would just be you and I.
the two of us?
Yeah.
We need our own channel, Anna.
No. I think that's called DMs.
I'll slide into your DM.
DMs? In DMs? See, there you go. Record for the records. Yes. So, do you want to do the spiel?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. You've been watching GeekSpaceTV. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all of the donations that came through for joining us today. We will be back live on GeekSpace in about 3 hours with High School Royale, a anime-styled RPG. Was that a thing to read?
Yeah, there's a donation from the pastry deity. How darest thou doubt mine existence in thine realm? Gaze upon my cakes, ye mighty, and despair. Hashtag less than 3.
I shall gaze upon your mighty cakes. And your sweet buns.
Lewd. So, High School Royale, this has been wonderful. Thank you very much.
We're going to talk...
I learned so much.
I think the main thing I'm probably going to do now is make you a list of things to answer. I'll make you a Google Doc. Google Duck.
Google Duck?
A Google Duck.
Google Duck.
It's like a gooey duck, but more useful. And then we will
and
be
less
back
phallic,
hopefully. Hopefully. God, they're like penis clams. They really are. We'll also be back on Friday, speaking of lewd, with another episode of Right Click. And that's all our programming for this week. Yes?
Yes. Right Click on Friday, and then and the show in 3 hours. High School Royale, yeah.
And in the meantime, check out our Patreon, follow us on the various social medias, catch up with stories if you don't remember anything over on the Wikia. And
I was just gonna say, feel free to put any of this up on the Wikia.
I probably won't keep it super detailed because
feel free to make fan art.
We're just gonna pause. Yeah. I hope someone screenshot
I'm like,
that.
I can't. My stream deck is broken. Ooh, there it is. It just went to sleep. Apparently, that's a new thing that it does. Why would it do that?
Doesn't seem useful while you're actively using it.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I don't want that. But okay. We'll
Maybe that's
work
a feature
with it.
you can
we'll
turn
roll
off.
with it. It's great. Yeah. So anyway, that's I think that's it for this episode,
We'll
this
be back
premiere
next week.
episode of Behind the Screens. Now we'll go record behind the scenes of Behind the Screens.
Yes.
Thank you all. See you in a few hours. Wait, where can we find you?
Oh, you can find me at Random Tuesday. That's the easiest.
We're not leaving. Yeah.
On my own stream, twitch.tv/Random Tuesday, here at GeekSpace on the internet. Or my Patreon, patreon.com/Random Tuesday.
And you don't need to know who I am. No. I'm Anna Geeks. You can find me on my own Twitch channel, Anna Geeks, and Anna Geeks on Twitter and just about everywhere but Instagram. Leave that person alone. It's not their fault they have my name.
Oh.
Anyway, and I run the behind the scenes here on the Geek Space, and soon I will be GMing a D&D show on Saturdays. So soon. All right, now we're leaving. Thank you all. Bye-bye.